I'm going to first kind of do a little bit of a survey and know that as important as the presentations today, it's important to know who else is in the crowd, and this is our community and people that you can exchange ideas with and are good resources. So take a look around and get to know the people sitting near you. I guess kind of first a show of hands, who today owns, operates, or manages row crop farms? Okay, so the majority. Anyone here fit that description as non-row crop, whether vegetable, orchard, or otherwise? Okay, so the majority of the folks are already having some row crop exposure, maybe a few people that are not in row crops and considering entering row crops. Out of that, who has farms in transition today? So we got a number of transitional farmers. How about fully certified? Okay, so we got a pretty good mix of people here, and it seems like majority are already doing some grain farming. So I guess out of that, who is focused on corn and soybeans? Which I would expect that's going to be the majority. How about who's raising or has raised small grains? Okay, so a fair amount as well. So take note of that and talk to your neighbors here, because that's as important as anything that anyone up here is going to say today. So I'm going to go through a couple things. Anyone that was either at the Farm Bureau Conference in Bloomington this summer or at the Western Illinois Field Day about a month ago saw some of these slides. I won't claim them as all original. Wyatt, Lynn Clarkson did a lot of these. I pared it down and added some different things. So what I'm going to focus on really is different ways that you can market and places you can go to with your grains, and some concerns and considerations that should be looked at. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, as people know. We kind of get a perspective of the consumer, and the consumer is really driving this as much as anything. People are asking for premium products. People are asking for non-GMO as well as chemical-free or certified organic products. And so with that comes opportunity. There's a pretty big discrepancy between the supply and the demand, and that creates opportunity to add value to your farms. If we look at Clarkson Grain as a merchant, and really producers and farmers are merchants as well. You know, you're growers until the point that your crop is harvested, and then you become a merchant for it. And there's a lot of opportunity there today, and we believe a lot of opportunity in the future. So being able to use identity preservation, or IP as we call it, is a good way to create some premium and add value to your farm no matter what that IP is. And we'll get into geography in a little bit, but that's probably as important as anything right now. But we aim to contract with farmers before planting so that we can secure supplies. As we think about more common crops, I'll just pick on non-GMO soybeans. You know, there's a lot of non-GMO soybeans being raised out there. Not so much in a specific variety of a clear hilum certified organic tofu bean. And so the more rare the product, the more need to contract it in advance, and the more need to make sure that you have that security and supply for the entire process. So as you think about the crops that you're growing, the seeds that you're ordering in the coming months to plant next year, or if it's a small grain that's getting sown this fall, definitely be aware of some of those rarities, I guess you'd say. You know, shipping methods are pretty standard for any grain. Truck, rail, barge, container. That's not anything surprising. I'm going to kind of buzz through some of these. You know, problems create opportunities for solutions. We talk about consistency, and I think later on today there's going to be some discussion with some open pollinated, and I know that heirloom grains are really, really hot right now, and people are asking for them, and I think there's a great opportunity there. I want to highlight that a company like Clarkson or some of our competitors may not be as apt to want to buy an open pollinated or an heirloom grain. I believe that more opportunity exists there for direct markets. So direct from the farm to a restaurant, to an artisan processor, and that creates opportunity for you. You know, some people may view a company like Clarkson as the middleman, and you have the opportunity with this to take the middleman out. There's still room for folks like Clarkson to do cleaning, shipping, storage, etc. But as you look into those more rare grains, whether it's some of the heirloom wheats and corns that are out there, or something different, I think there's a big opportunity there. So when we talk about quality, we mean consistency, and the tortilla market's a good example. Consistency is very important. It needs to be the same every day so that when you open your bag of tortilla chips, it tastes the same and looks the same every time. And so we define quality as consistency for that reason. And then there's other quality considerations like improved process yields, or I might pick on a specific variety of wheat that happens to be a high protein. And so any of those value triggers that are out there are a way to discern from your farm to the buyer, and therefore more value. So transparency, traceability are all really important. The know your farmer, know where your food comes from is a big deal in the U.S., and it's a big deal around the world. People are wanting to know that, and technology is there today to be able to get that information. You can take a picture of planting, of the crop growing, of harvesting. You know the GPS location of that, and that can be emailed out to your buyer and posted in their storefront, and that's what a lot of folks are looking for. They're aiming to have that transparency. So it's a big opportunity for farms. We talk about commodity versus IP. You know, IP has some differentiated value, whether that's a non-GMO, it could be a color, it could be white corn, blue corn, red corn, etc. But there's a specific benefit there, perceived benefit to the buyer. We go into cultural preferences. You know, that's really where most of this is driven from, is people prefer to purchase something that has added value. So I think everybody knows these things, or you wouldn't be here today. You're already showing interest, so I don't want to go too deep into that. But we can talk price. I think that's what a lot of this comes down to, and make sure that's up on the screen. These are generalizations. The markets move every day, but if we look at last year, premiums were higher for most all grains. I think everyone here knows that commodity prices are down, and not only are the futures market's down, but the cash prices are also. So if we look at, you know, for example, non-GMO, number 2 yellow corn, last year we were seeing a lot of 25 to 85 cent per bushel premiums. Keep in mind that is location driven. If you're on the Illinois River, where a large amount of non-GMO corn is exported, there's a better premium. If you're in Danforth, Illinois, there's not a lot of non-GMO buyers locally here, so you're going to have to put some trucking on it, and that trucking might eat up your premium. And that goes back to more rare the product, the further it can travel. And if you're growing an organic, variety-specific product, odds are it can travel multi-states away because it's that rare, and the buyers are going to need to pay that premium. Fast forward to 2016, we're seeing non-GMO corn maybe 10 to 70 cents premium. I guess I'll go on a limb and say I think most people here would sell their non-GMO at a 70-cent premium all day. So I don't think that's there today. That may be a little dated, especially with having a big market or a big crop coming on this year. We go to organic yellow corn. That's been a falling market. Folks here that are raising organic corn know what's happened in that. Guess I'll give a bigger picture view and say really since about 2010, last 5 or 6 years, folks have been rewarded for planting, putting away in bins, and holding it. The forward contracts were almost always cheaper than pricing it out of the bin. That reversed course this year, and so we can't ever predict the future on what's going to happen there, so don't kick yourself if you did forward contract and then kicked yourself for giving up a higher price. But I think the thing that really hit us this year is not a slowdown in demand, but the imports hit. And we can talk some more about that, but imported grains have really changed the face of the organic market. We're seeing more and more food companies, more and more feed companies jumping on, and folks that have had mostly conventional products are starting to introduce organic. I'll give the example of your major food companies are publicly traded, and they're challenged with growth. They have to grow or they die, or they get bought out and chopped up. And so market share's pretty mature on those brands, and they're introducing organic products as a way to gain a new group of consumers, add value, and do the same things that you're doing on your farm. So we're seeing a lot more demand, but we're also seeing a lot more pressure on supply. And that's a little bit frightening, and I think that we have to be really careful about expectations for the prices moving forward. So that's yellow corn. I'm going to say that we see a lot of yellow corn being priced in the $7 to $9 bushel range right now. This spring before planting, it was more like a 10 to 12, and a year ago at this time, probably more like 13 to 15. So those are real numbers that make things a little bit tighter on the farm, just like in conventional farming. We talk about organic white corn. Generally, there's a $1 to $3 bushel premium for organic white compared to the yellow. For anyone here that's raised white corn, we think that the yield potential is absolutely there, and there's no fear that you're going to see a yield drag. So it's just a little bit of extra management to be able to isolate and store that white corn. The primary market for that's going to be into the snack food market, whereas your yellow, you're able to go into animal feed markets, human consumption markets, and there's probably more market flexibility there. The other thing I'll mention about food grade corn is latitude. And the further north you go, the more difficult it is to get your test weight up to a point that a food buyer is going to want it. If you're in Fargo, North Dakota, you're probably not going to get the test weights that are needed to make tortilla chips. If you're in this latitude, you're probably in good shape most years. So that's just something to consider. Actually, is everyone here from Illinois? Anyone out of state? Okay, where out of state? Indiana. Okay, so close enough by. Most of Indiana is going to be able to grow food grade crops as well. You know, I didn't put blue or red or some of your more niche products on here, but the takeaway is that those higher level niches are going to command a higher level price premium, and usually that's going to be a couple dollars a bushel above your organic white. One thing I'll also mention, I'll take a chance to mention crop insurance, is the game's changed. I know last year at this field day, someone presented specifically on that, and I would recommend anyone considering or raising organic look at the contract price addendum. That's a good opportunity to lock in higher value. USDA has really got on board with supporting organic production and supporting financial results in that. Is important because if you can't go out and insure it, then you may not want to take the risk, or your banker may not want to back you on it. So the quick takeaway is the contract price addendum allows you to lock in a higher price than the USDA average price. I think the USDA price for standard organic contracts was $7.75 a bushel or so this year. And if you contracted ahead at $10, for example, you're able to lock in that $10 price. So that's a big deal and something to watch for the coming year. As we look at soybeans, similar story with fading premiums. Non-GMO beans last year, call it $1.50 to $2.25 over. This year, that's faded back about 50 cents a bushel. And as I mentioned earlier, there's more non-GMO beans out there, just generic, non-variety specific, than the market can absorb. I know a lot of beans that are just going into the country elevator without a premium right now. So if you're dedicated to raising non-GMO beans and you're wanting a premium, consider raising a clear Highland bean or some other specific variety to get that value up. We look at organic beans, and they've really taken a bigger hit than the corn has if you look at it as a percentage of your gross. You know, a year ago, a lot of organic beans were trading $27 to $30 a bushel, and buyers couldn't get enough of them. Today, the imports have really hurt that market, and one of the big reasons is a lot of your feed markets, your animal feed is on the coasts, your west coast and east coast. And we're not only getting whole soybeans imported, but we're also getting meal imported. And so if you're getting meal out of India and China, and it can land in Pennsylvania, for example, or South Carolina or California, there's a transportation advantage. Not only is the product coming in cheaper, but it's cheaper to truck it from the coast to that feed mill than it is from Illinois to that feed mill. So that's disappointing. There's some efforts in place right now to secure more domestic supply, but definitely something to keep a watch on and keep our expectations with reality. At the bottom, keys to good organic crops. I think everyone knows here, fertility is important. You got to have nitrogen to grow corn. Soybeans, weed control is probably the biggest challenge. I think folks will talk later about that today that can give more insights. So talk a little bit about the history. We're 20 years into GMO crops in the U.S. We're 90% or so market share if we look at total acres. The initial premium for the non-GMO happened in the export market, and that's been a long time. Japan's the #1 buyer of U.S. corn and has been for many years, and a lot of their corn that comes in is non-GMO, and they have a preference for that. We're just now starting to see more domestic demand happening. There's been a lot of talk about it, and I think in the coming year we'll see that talk turn into reality. You have Dannon Foods, for example, that has announced that they're going to take their dairies all non-GMO. So we start to see some of those things happen, and it creates demand, and that's a non-centralized demand. It's scattered. Granted, there's not a lot of dairies right here, but there's quite a few dairies in Indiana and Ohio, up into Michigan, and so you start to get that pull, and with that demand comes opportunity for you. Talk about labeling. The federal government finally got on board and has started to take some action. It's not exactly clear how some of that's going to work out, but the point is that it is national at this point. Vermont was the first to pass something, and I believe, and I think a lot of people here believe, that a definition of non-GMO is important and a national standard is important. It would be very risky to have Vermont with one standard, Illinois with another, and Colorado with another yet. So we need that consistency to be able to bring this up to mainstream. So we talked about tolerance standards. There's some pretty healthy concerns, especially with corn, about contamination. GMO contamination is a real problem out there. We look at the Asian standards, and 95% is the official Japanese standard. Most Japanese are going to want 97 to 98% purity. Almost all your domestic markets are looking for a 99.1. They're aiming to meet the European standard. That's the non-GMO Project Verified standard. And even with organic corn, it's tough to get that. One, it comes in the seed, and two, it moves in the pollen. And we're really in year 3 now of really nice pollination windows, and we see a lot of contaminated seed. So do your background work if you can, and test your seed. Press your seed dealers on that, because if you have 1.5 GMO in your seed, it's not going to get any better in the field, and there's a chance that you're going to lose your market. And we battle that every day. And I'll just be honest, Clarkson's having loads rejected right now because we're getting 1.1, 1.2 GMO showing up on organic yellow corn, stuff that we bought in from the farms, throughout this past year. And that's as good as the sample goes. You probe 2 pounds out of 50,000 in a semi, and you might get 0.7, 0.8, and the next probe is 1.1. And so that's a concern, and definitely something to watch, and something to be aware of when you're contracting, regardless of who the buyer is. Quick history, pre-USDA program, there were a lot of different standards out there. Having a USDA label brought everything to one set of rules and gave some clarity, and really gave the retail markets an opportunity to run with that and say, we can put our name behind this, and we know what this means. Everyone knows what USDA organic means, and that's a way to make sure that it's consistent. I guess I'll also say that 2016 continues to see growth. We think that the next generation of consumers will continue to ask for this, and some of you folks have maybe heard me say in the past that my generation was the first to grow up with a microwave oven in every home. My parents didn't have a microwave. I did. My child and that next generation is the first to grow up with organic food from birth. And that's important because everyone up until a recent point has been a conscious choice to convert themselves or choose to buy organic products. And my son has consumed it from birth and isn't probably going to think twice about it. And so that's a shift change, and I think that sets the stage for long-term growth in this industry. This next slide's probably going to, maybe it'll incite some questions, I don't know, but we look at imports, and that's been a killer for everybody in this room, and something that may continue. About a month ago, I did catch a rumor that the leading exporter out of Romania was decertified, and that's alarming. We don't know what's behind that, and we know that the risk is that if there's bad players and crooked actors out there, that they're going to recertify under another name, show back up, and the ship comes in. And so we're never going to be able to stop bad actors in the Black Sea region, in India, in China, wherever that's coming from. But what we can do is focus on purchasing U.S. origin. And I know that there's a major poultry company right now that said, yes, we know the certificate is there, we know the risk is there, and we don't want to get a black eye and lose our faith. We don't want our consumers losing faith in our company because we were caught up in an issue where we were buying corn that wasn't actually organic, or soybean meal, or whatever that product is. So I think that's really important and something that I see changing, where we'll see more demand for domestic. We look at the imports by dollar, and you can see that it's surged. We look at soybeans, and keep in mind this includes soybean meal. Just a couple years ago, we're 41 million, and this past year, 240 million. So it's grown 6 times in the last 5 years. And I think that 2016 will show even higher numbers than what's on here. Corn, same situation. I mean, it is surged and really tripled in a year, and we think that 2016 will show similar. So I hate that for everybody here because we do believe that that's pressured your price. That took you from $12 organic corn to $8 organic corn, and that's tough, but that's the driver. Go ahead.
Didn't Russia announce that they wanted to be the leader in organic production?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some really interesting things happening with Russia. I think it was within about a week or two's time that we had some announcements about European approval of some GMO traits, and it wasn't 2 weeks after that, Russia comes out and bans cultivation of GMO crops. And so kind of a shift change if you think about that. And yeah, there have been some statements out of Russia, and it's a good opportunity for Russia. It's a good opportunity for the U.S. or anywhere that grows crops. I just hope that the monitoring of that and the integrity of that organic production is in fact real. So there's risk there. Good.
This issue with Romania and some of the imports that are coming in the East Coast, and there is this issue about whether it's real or not real. Who's responsible? Is that USDA's responsibility for the monitoring and testing of those traits?
Well, it comes with a certificate, and yeah, that is the difficult part. So if anyone here has been inspected, they know that an inspector is a contractor with the USDA, but they're independent. And we know that some U.S. companies have certifiers outside of the U.S. and some foreign companies, I'll pick on EcoCert, who is pretty big in this area, is French-based, and they have inspectors all over the world. And so you mentioned traits, and there is no GMO tolerance definition in the organic standard. It's a process claim that non-GMO seeds were planted and non-prohibited substances were used. And so there's no good way to test that. We could do chemical residue testing, but if you look at corn and soybean meal, there's not likely going to be any chemical residue left on them anyway. We could get into the glyphosate issue with wheat and how it's commonly used to kill off and even up wheat, and that's when you'll see it show up. But if someone wanted to cheat on that, unfortunately, that's
So it ultimately falls back to the certifier then.
falls back to the certifier. That's right. And with, oh goodness, I don't know whether 70 or 80 certifiers maybe. If one says no, they go to the next one, and that's too bad. Go ahead, Harold.
Well, I think it's time that the USDA step up to the plate and make sure that if Vladimir is planting organic corn and he's doing all the practices that we're doing in the United States, then fine and dandy. I'm going to congratulate him and hope he has a good, a good crop and a good lot. But if USDA is allowing these counterfeiters to bring in grain, I see that as much as a black eye on the organic industry, because if it's not organic coming in, and people are being sold that it's organic, then the USDA is not doing their job. And at some point, they need to put the money towards making sure that any grain coming into the United States is organically produced. And if they're not, it falls in the USDA's hands.
Absolutely. And
we as organic farmers don't have the political whatever it takes to make those changes, but we need to find a way to make sure that it's a level playing field. And believe me, I'm sitting here in my presentation, I've got something about, I think corn was 304 this morning, 3 miles down the road, and I can get 850, this fall. That's still 3 times, or almost 3 times what my neighbor's getting for today.
And that's exactly right. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom talking about low prices, but the multiplier effect is still there. That's right. When commodity corn was $4.50 a year ago, organic corn was still 3 times that. And so, the 2.5 to 3 time multiplier remains in effect. When I talked about soybeans earlier, that's when it's really getting squeezed. I mean, you can get $12, say, for maybe not quite that today, for a non-GMO bean this summer, whereas an organic bean is maybe not a whole lot higher than that. So to your point about imports and USDA policing, don't hesitate to talk to your representatives. I know Rodney Davis, he's a local guy south of Decatur who is the chairman for the horticulture committee, for the House Horticulture Committee, and that committee oversees the NOP. So definitely stay on that. Your voices are heard. We're very fortunate to have Tom Vilsack as Secretary of Agriculture. He's been a huge supporter. And he had Kathleen Merrigan as his deputy secretary for a while, and Kathleen's been a longtime organic supporter. She actually was involved in writing the organic rules several years ago. So I don't think that we would have had quite the national success that we have in the last 4 years or so without Tom Vilsack. So keep on it at a national level. Not just you can talk to your certifier about it, but your certifier is probably not going to take that to the next level. So definitely be vocal. And I think if we look back to the merchant side and the retail side of things, the preference for a locally produced or knowing the source of it is going to continue to be there. I don't know what it was about 10 years ago. The melamine issue came up in China, if anyone remembers that. Some Chinese were adding melamine to soy products to give the appearance of higher protein levels, and that made its way into baby food and formula, and that's terrible. That really gave a black eye and gave a lot of people reason to say, no, we are not going to buy out of China. We're not going to do it. And we're just one news story away from having, someone take a picture of spraying chemicals in Romania on a, I don't know what the story will be, but we think it's out there. And I would say that for the vast majority of production in North America, the integrity of the organic production is there. I do have faith in the system here. I unfortunately don't outside of the U.S. So point is, it's a factor. It's probably going to continue to be a factor. And so as producers, if you can align yourself with buyers that are dedicated to U.S. production, I think that'll help as opposed to being aligned with someone that says, well, it's just got to be the cheapest price. Don't need to necessarily go into a lot of these things. I think everyone knows knows some of the hurdles and some of the challenges to making that transition. I think the bottom point there is probably the most important. You know, how are you going to survive those couple years during transition? And there's two ways to look at that. You know, when commodity prices are low like they are now, your opportunity cost of foregoing that income for those couple years is less, but at the same time, you got to pay the bills and keep the lights on in the meantime. So that's an individual decision and something that each of you are going to have to ask yourself. But I think the others, you know, fear of the unknown, you know, days like this and a lot of the information that's out there makes it more reachable than it was in the past to say, okay, you know, we know ways to work through this and work with this. But, you know, supporting advice, that's where it goes, to talk to your neighbors and talk to your people in the room here. Bankers, I think we're on that. Insurance, it's there. You know, in the weed-free culture, I kind of don't want to poke too hard, but there's an awful lot of GMO beans out there that could easily be mistaken for an organic field, and so we know that, you know, people that kind of poked at organic production for a long time are maybe eating their words or being a little more quiet right now. So I think it's officially known that Roundup has run its course, and we got to do something different. And so I think that a lot of these hurdles have been overcome, is the point. So we talk about new tools, and there's a company called Marone. I'm not trying to have an advertisement for them, but they're an example of a company that's dedicated to creating some organic products and seem to have some merit. Regalia is their flagship product, and it's actually used in a lot of conventional applications as a fungicide. And I think the next generation of biologicals that are coming out are going to be really interesting for organic production. And if we can get our soils healthy and help that along, it's going to help quite a few things. I talked a little bit earlier about being free of GMO. You can dive into that if you need to, but just know that it's less of a risk for, I'll say, as an orchard or vegetable crop than it is as a grain crop, and certainly most risky with corn. Seed purity, we can dive into that, but just know your supply situation. We know that pure maize is a naturally occurring gene that's out there that definitely works. You know, we've seen it work, but grow what works on your farm. CRISPR, Cas9, I'm going to just touch on that briefly, and something to really keep a watch on. It's all over the science journals, isn't quite making its way into the ag publications yet, but there is commercialization happening today with CRISPR-Cas9 in corn. It's happening in other places, and I'll botch this, but the explanation as I understand it is actually gene editing, gene splicing. And it's a little bit frightening, but they go into the DNA, break the strip, insert or change out or delete X gene or X trait in there, and it changes the characteristic of whatever that is, whether that's a human cell, an animal, a plant, and it's starting with plants. But the frightening thing about it is it's not considered GMO, and there's no way to test for it. So, and I'm not throwing stones at this, but I know that DuPont Pioneer has yellow waxy corn being developed now that they think they'll be selling to farmers in around 2020. And what they've done is gone into a yellow hybrid, took a good, vigorous yellow hybrid, and edited the genes to express the waxy traits. And there's no GMO test in the world that will pick that up. Monsanto is releasing white corn. They're going to start selling white corn in 2017 crop for the first time. I don't know. Asgrow used to have some white corn back in the 90s, but when I pressed a guy, I said, well, where do you get your germplasm? Tell me a little bit about this. And he said, well, all the breeder told me is they took their best yellow and they switched something in it to make it white. So I don't know if that's Cas9 CRISPR, but just really keep a watch on this. I don't want to insert a value judgment, but there's a pretty broad range of opinions on this, you know, to the point of keep it out of all of our production, absolutely keep it out of organic production, to people that are saying, yes, this is the solution for organic GMO. And so just just keep a watch on it. I don't think it's going to be hitting your fields for the next couple years, but in the next 5 years, you're going to start to see it out there. And the frightening thing for me is that you can't test for it. That's the tough part. So we don't know what comes down the line. Okay, so what to grow on my farm. This really gets down to the nuts and bolts of it. When we talk about what to grow on your farm, what kind of soils do you have, you know? If you're on sandy ground, maybe you can grow watermelons. You know, Roger Hendricker, who works with Clarkson Grain, is a pretty successful organic watermelon grower. You can find his products in Whole Foods in Chicago, St. Louis, and in other stores. If you're right here, I don't think Harold and Ross want to grow watermelons here. I don't think that that's a good, you know, this is grains country. And so look at your soils first and look at what grows well on your soils. Don't try to force fit something that just isn't going to work for you. We talk about scale, acreage size. You know, just because it's not the largest farm in the world doesn't mean that it can't be very successful raising grains. So fit your production to the scale that you can operate on. And then that also goes to equipment and labor. If you're trying to grow something that's a high niche, make sure that you've got the ability to handle it. And then we look at geography, proximity to market. You know, if you're going to direct market into Chicago, I think most people in this room are within delivery proximity to Chicago. If you're in Mississippi, maybe it's going to be tough to get to that market. So something that everyone in this room is really blessed with is that we're in a production area, good Midwest soils, climate, but we're also close to large urban centers. That can include Indianapolis, St. Louis. You even go into, you know, that Mid-South, you know, Memphis, Louisville, and some of your cities. It's a big deal. And the East Coast is already there. The West Coast is already there. If anyone's following what's going on with the local grains production, folks like Anson Mills have been doing this for a long time. And a lot of your restaurants are featuring locally produced grains. And we're starting to see some more of that here. And that's a big opportunity for everyone, whether that's a large portion of your farm or a small portion of your farm. It's something to really keep a watch on. We talk about the export market. I mentioned earlier that's a river market. It can be a container market. I'll say that we're starting to see more interest in organic exports in Asia. I'm pretty excited about that. Asians are natural consumers of U.S. production. There's too many people for the amount of land that they have to produce, and they're going to continue to rely on U.S. production for a long time. A quick little fact for you that I was surprised to learn earlier this year, that Taiwan is the #1 buyer of U.S. exported organic production, more than the EU. I was really surprised about that, but they're buying it, and that's a fruit and vegetable market and dairy market just like it is in the U.S., but we're starting to see more grains. I'll say that Japan and Korea are starting to have some interest in organically fed poultry and pork. Okay, that's an export market for your feed grains. So that's a big deal and something to definitely keep a watch on. We talk about infrastructure and some needs and advantages. I highly recommend OnFarm Storage for any organic production. It's going to give you the staying power to be able to hold your crop, to dry your crop, and get it ready for market. If you haven't sold it ahead and you want to market out of the bin, you have that opportunity. If you're needing to load it right off the combine and get it to market, you're going to be a little more captive on the markets that you can go to. And so that's probably one of the first investments I would suggest making on an organic farm. You know, we talk about cleaning, and there's a difference between rough cleaning. We think about a rotary screener or even just a small fan mill compared to finished cleaning. And I know that Janie's Farm's probably as far up that value stream as anyone when it comes to cleaning and taking that next step. And so folks that are selling into food markets already know the value of screening it on farm. But to get it into a finished product and ready to be on a grocery shelf, it's probably going to take a little bit more equipment. And so there's a range of what you can do there. We talk about milling, packaging, inspections and certifications. Do your homework on that. I know these guys have done a lot of work on that, and Milling and packaging is a great way to add a lot of value. It's also a way to create a lot of work for yourself. So make sure you got the time and resources to make that happen, because you can consume quite a bit of time in that. Let me go to inspections and certifications. I'll say the more national the program, the more need for inspection. If you're selling to a restaurant, they're probably happy to buy something off of your farm. If you're selling to something that is packaged and put on grocery shelves across the U.S., you're probably going to need to be inspected by an AIB or an SQF or some of these third-party inspections. And if someone wants to get in more detail on that, we can, but there's a lot of documentation with it, more documentation than an organic inspection, but anyone here that's been through the organic documentation knows that you're already having to record a lot of information and put that together. And then, of course, time. You know, that's everyone's Achilles heel, I guess, that, you know, as you move up the value chain and as you move yourself into milling, packaging, cleaning, whatever that next step is, got to make sure that you've got the time to do that right and do that in a way that's going to make your customer happy all the time. I didn't include any slides in here, but I want to kind of highlight that there's a number of markets to go to. I don't want this to be an advertisement for ourselves, but I kind of break the organic buying market into two groups. One would be asset-based, and one would be non-asset-based. And each of them have their advantages. And the non-asset-based would be like brokers. You know, they're a co-op, or I know All-Star Trading has a good reputation as brokers. And as I think about that, if you're selling into a facility compared to selling into a broker, it gives you some market flexibility there to go to markets that you may not see otherwise. And so as a broker, they may be able to go out of state or have markets that you don't have. As we think about asset-based folks like a Clarkson Grain or O'Malley Grain, which is now part of the Andersons at Mansfield, or grain millers over in Marion, Indiana, or Yorktown Organics up at Tampico have had pretty good growth in their feed mill. Or you have Rovi Seed south of Farmersville starting to get into that market. Those are a few local examples of folks that are asset-based, who have a pretty good reputation and long history in that market. I guess I'll caution anyone, if you've never heard of a company and they call you up with a deal that sounds too good to be true, ask around and make sure. You know, unfortunately, with a lot of dollars out there and a lot of opportunity for added value, there can be some bad actors. For the most part, it's a good industry, but just know that as soon as you enter your operation into the NOP and the USDA inspected program, you're on a national database, and anyone in this room can get on the USDA database and pull a list of all certified organic operations in the U.S. You can sort it by state, zip code, production type, and everything. And so that's where a lot of people get their mailing lists, which is good. That's how you're discovered and found. But just be cautious with who you're selling into. Ask the other people in the room and try to find out some references of people that are already selling to them. And around here, we've had pretty good luck with that, but I do know a few cases, primarily in the Western Corn Belt, where people have had grain picked up and never paid for it, and then it disappears, and the buying outfit goes into bankruptcy, or you name it, and that's very, very dangerous. So anyway, I know we're pressed on time. Does anyone have any final questions, or I hope I've talked about things that are important to you today? All right, no questions. Catch me later on if anyone has anything that comes up. Thank you.